Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, members of the national community who hopefully are following us wherever you are on your various platforms. A very good evening to you. Let me begin by apologizing for my late arrival to an event that should have started at 2:30. But today, as you know, Thursday's cabinet and one or two little ends had to be tied up before I could join you. So I hope that you will forgive me for that late arrival. Today, I want to spend a few minutes bringing you up to date on matters that are of serious import for us here in Trinidad and Tobago, insofar as we are an integral part of the Caribbean community, Caricom. As you would have been aware, I did attend with a delegation from Trinidad and Tobago to the Caricom Heads of Government meeting in Suriname. And this meeting took place, we arrived there on Sunday, and the meeting went on, it ended on Tuesday night. I came back in early Wednesday morning. I want to begin by saying that it really was probably for me the most productive heads of government meeting that I have ever attended, for the simple reason that the format was a little different, and the nature of the work program was that we identified specific issues and took decisions on some very weighty matters. And hopefully that approach will allow the CARICOM territories to benefit from a decision-making exercise, ongoing as it might be, but along the way the outcome would be that certain things that have been lying in wait to ambush, or things that should have been addressed, would be addressed in some reasonable time frame, and in some cases with matters of urgency. You may recall that a little while ago, Trinidad and Tobago advanced to CARICOM and did host here at the Hilton a meeting on the requirement to bring about the provisions of the single market and economy. The reason for this is that the conversation in the community finds it well supported that we all 13 territories, are better off if we have a single market and economy operating, meaning that your market is my market and my market is your market. And then we leave it to the private sector to move freely within that market, goods, services, and of course, the general population. We did get agreement, and in fact that agreement was signed off and is now labeled the St. Anne's Accord, where CARICOM governments, through their heads, had agreed to implement the various components that were required to progress along the pathway of a single market and economy. And you may ask, why is that far-reaching and why is it important? It is because insofar as there are barriers to trade within us, even in our own small market, those barriers create difficulties and make our life even more troublesome than it normally is. But in the event that we are able to not have these barriers, then we would be in a better position to develop our economies and improve the quality of life of all our people within the CARICOM, whether it is in Jamaica, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Guyana, in Grenada, St. Vincent. We all have the same kinds of problems, and we are trying to treat with these problems, sharing them and solving them in a market that we all own. That is the strength of CARICOM. And we have discovered, as we did recently in the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, that when we close ranks and operate as a unit, that it is very difficult for us to be ignored, even on the international stage outside of the Caricom region. So the main body of decisions that we took in Guyana, and there's on the website of Caricom, there's a very lengthy communique. But permit me to just quote a few of the lines and paragraphs in keeping with what I've just been saying. Under the heading of Caricom Single Market and Economy, and you may want to, here in Trinidad and Tobago, take note of this and dance accord. Heads of government expressed disappointment at the slow pace of implementation of the Caricom Single Market and Economy, CSME, and took immediate steps to move the process forward. They noted, in particular, the area of movement of skilled workers. In that regard, agreed to definitions and qualifications for household domestics and agricultural worker and private security officers, which are agreed categories for free movement. Heads of government mandated the Secretariat to convene meetings of the Registrar of Companies and Ministers with responsibility for companies before the end of July 2022, which is this month, to elaborate the steps to enable member states to implement the principle of mutual recognition of any company incorporated in another Caricom member state and report to the conference at its meeting in September. Let me just break that down a little bit for you. You probably would know by now, and members of the media must know, that in attempting to implement the single market and the economy, we have already established in law and in practice certain categories of Caricom people who can move within the territories, a whole list of people, skilled people, teachers, musicians, technical people, and they're all laid out there. And then, of course, it is said that we are favoring the privilege. But the whole idea is to move towards free movement of people. But we don't have initially mass movement with no restrictions. We move by categories. So that has been going on. And what the Caricom has just done is that for persons for whom the domestic workers and agricultural workers are important categories, they have advanced those as categories that need to be allowed to move more freely. For example, as you would know, there's Guyana, there's Belize, there's Suriname, where they, I would say, desperately need more people along the lines of agricultural workers. And therefore, in moving to Caricom, single market and economy, we are saying that those categories of people should be allowed to move. Trinidad and Tobago, there are someone here already. And of course, there are domestic workers who can qualify to move within. There was a little difficulty with that before. Some people were saying, well, who is a domestic worker, who is a farm worker, and so on. And then it was raised at the meeting that here it is that we in Trinidad and Tobago have a history, and other territories admitted it, St. Vincent and Jamaica and others, where we send farm workers to other people's countries. But yet we are unable to have our farm workers move among us because we don't know who is a farm worker and what is a farm worker. So what has been determined is that we would use the ILO definition, and those definitions are available, and that then should remove the impediment of not knowing who is a farm worker or who is a domestic worker. And of course, with respect to the removal of tariffs, even though we are struggling or hankering after the creation of this single market and economy, what has been happening is that in virtually every territory, people have been using non-tariff barriers to prevent trade between our territories. The tariff barriers are the ones that are spelled out in law, with certain conditions and certain rates and so on and so on. That the law says in or out, if it comes in, that's the figure, and of course there's the quoted that manages that and so on. But then countries at the individual level will go now and add, okay, if your dasheen is blue, then we say that blue dasheen is not good in our territory, and that's a non-tariff barrier. There's no tariff saying that you can't bring that in. If your meat is from Jamaica, there's no tariff that says that Jamaican meat can't come in. But somebody can say, well, we're not sure Jamaican cows are healthy. And then if Trinidad pork is to go out, somebody can say, by the way, you had swine fever 25 years ago, so we're not sure if you still have swine fever. So these kinds of things, even though what the region wants and is admitting is the best for us, which is a free market, which we call the single market and economy, where the market in Jamaica is the same market as the market in Barbados. So if you produce anything in this country, you're not limited to selling it only to Trinidad and Tobagonians, but the people in St. Vincent, Grenada, Bahamas, they too are your market. And therefore, you can see a higher and wider horizon. But if people are there putting in these barriers, then all that we do is talk about it every 6 months, and we do not get it done. At this meeting in Guyana, in Suriname, steps have been taken to ensure that we remove non-tariff barriers while being careful not to encourage the deleterious aspects of movement of materials. For example, ensure that we are still cognizant of phytosanitary conditions, to ensure that only healthy animals are moved or healthy meat is moved, and plant material that can be deleterious to other countries not moved. But we don't use those as barriers unless they are scientifically and technically sound reasons for doing so. And of course, there are lots of other instances one can point to where local interests put flimsy things in the way and get obstructions to incoming materials. And that is, in fact, widespread across the region. Now, rest assured that when, I'm not saying if now, I'm saying when we establish what the heads have just instructed the Secretariat to do, that Trinidad and Tobago suppliers can more easily supply what they produce everywhere else in the region. But by the same token, other people who are producing similar things or things that we do not now allow in, they will now have access to our market, because the underlying principle of the single market and economy is that my market is yours and your market is mine. So as long as we remain part of the Caricom under law, under the Treaty of Chaguaramas, and we admit that we are better off under the single market and economy, let us prepare ourselves to receive the outcome of that. And we are sure that much of it would be for our benefit. But there may be instances where there'll be conversations that, well, maybe this, that, no, and this, not so, but we are taking that plunge, not unilaterally, but as a decision of the Caricom under the Treaty of Chaguaramas. We cannot stay where we are and every 6 months talk about what we want to do, knowing full well that we don't intend to do it, because we are more concerned about preserving the status quo. The heads of government have determined the time has come for us to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk along the way towards the single market and economy as envisaged and committed to here in Trinidad in the St. Anne's Accord. Now, we have been pushed to this, not because we all just got there and got a VAPS and say, now we're going to be different to other prime ministers in a different era. The current circumstances in the world have pushed us to this, particularly in two areas. One is the area of food supply and food security, where as a result of COVID-19, a pandemic, that none of us who are alive today have been ever exposed to before. We have just experienced, and we are still experiencing it, COVID-19 for over 2 years. And one of the things that came out of that is our vulnerability with respect to obtaining adequate and affordable supplies of food in a world where when everybody is scrambling for food, we are likely not even to get scraps. And to the extent that we are able to access food on the international market, it was my intention today to show you a whole series of what is happening with food availability and food prices in other countries, because some people in Trinidad and Tobago wake up in the morning and believe that it is the Prime Minister causing that because he don't like people, and we go and march against the high prices and so on, when in fact, because the whole world is experiencing it at the same time, there are certain peculiarities that go with that. And two of those peculiarities are unavailability and also drastic increase in prices. You would have seen in India, because of the shortage in supply of wheat, they are now moving towards sweet potato as a major replacement as a carbohydrate, well, because wheat is not available. And of course, not only COVID, 6 months ago, we didn't expect to be in a situation where 2 European countries are at war and threatening the Third World War. It might come slowly, but the war is going on in Ukraine. Russia is involved, and immediately the world food supply is threatened, the world fertilizer supply is threatened, the world fuel supply is threatened. And of course, Caricom has had to act. So we've dealt with these matters in that context where we have been pushed to take the decisions that we are taking now. And of course, with respect to food, when you look at the communique, you would see it says that we've given ourselves a target to increase our food supply by 25%, to reduce our food import bill by 25% by 2025. That may not sound like a lot, but what you're recognizing here now is the extent to which we are dependent on imported food. So even when we make a major step in trying to deal with our imported food, we can only reasonably set a target of 25% reduction. That should tell us how exposed we are. And to do that, the heads, there's a quasi-cabinet operating inside the Caricom, where different heads of government have responsibilities for managing the efforts of certain aspects of our concerns. Guyana has been responsible for driving the initiatives on food, and you would have seen just over a month ago, I think it was, I did visit Guyana when Guyana hosted the Agri Forum and Investment, when some major presentations were made, and a number of Caricom heads were present to receive these reports and plans. And we have, in that situation, determined that the smaller territories, while they would want to and must protect whatever agricultural effort they have within their borders and increase as much as they can, because of what we rely on as our food supply, we will not be able to significantly impact our imports by what is going on in the smaller territories. What we can do to bring about that outcome of significantly reducing our dependence on external extra Caricom supplies is to use the resources, mainly the land space that is available in 3 of our territories, Guyana, Belize, Suriname, and more importantly, the existing operations that exist on the Venezuelan border with Brazil, where one of the smaller Brazilian states, Roraima, is prepared to function as a 14th Caricom country without being part of Caricom, but to bring into Caricom by geography, because it is so close. It's a river, much bigger than Caribbean River, of course, but one of the smaller rivers in Guyana. The step between Guyana and the Rupununi in Guyana and Roraima is just crossing a bridge. And you're into significant existing production of protein and carbohydrate food, large volumes of food material, which the Guyana effort leading CARICOM to food security and engage in food supply creations have brought Roraima into our equation to support CARICOM's effort to ensure that food is available in CARICOM, coming all the way from Roraima through Guyana, through Trinidad and Tobago, and all the way up to the north, to ensure that nobody in CARICOM is short of food under any circumstance. And that first phase of that work has been quite advanced, and CARICOM acknowledged the yeoman service being done and having done by President Irfan Ali on some foundational work that were done by President Bar Jagdeo, and recently Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados and Antigua got involved, and we are driving that. In order to keep that going to where it's supposed to go, which is to the practicality of it and the delivery, there's a meeting here in Trinidad and Tobago on the 19th. We are having phase 2 of this agricultural effort, agro-investment, where we'll be focusing on encouraging the actual investment to bring about on the ground in CARICOM, in these areas where the possibilities exist. That meeting will take place from the 19th into the weekend of the 20th, and we have in our own agri-expo here, showcase what we are doing now, exposing others to us, and encouraging our private sector in Trinidad and Tobago and the region, and of course the Brazilians who are involved in this process. They'll be coming here to make their sales pitches to us and their offer of cooperation. We expect the governor of Roraima to be here leading a team. The CARICOM team would be there, and of course Trinidad and Tobago's private sector, Barbados' private sector, Guyanese private sector. We all would be here hammering away at what we can do to ensure that there is an adequate supply of corn, an adequate supply of rice, an adequate supply of possible wheat, because there are certain wheat varieties that are successfully being tested in the Rupununi Roraima area right now, and of course no end of fresh fruits and vegetables. So we are working on, and we have a clear-eye view now on what the supply line is going to be. And of course, we are also talking about significant engagement with the Brazilians on livestock production and production systems, which can produce for us adequate supplies of meat, and of course, introduce to our farmers here in Trinidad and Tobago modern methods and support for beef and milk production within the CARICOM territories where there is a private sector demand for that. So we are of the view that if we put all these things together and get them invested in and funded, that CARICOM would not be as vulnerable as we are now, especially as the predictions are that COVID-19 is not alone. It is quite possible that we have to plan for similar COVIDs or whatever they're called in the future, where we find ourselves in that situation where we are competing for the basics in life and not being able to buy them even if we have the money. Not to mention that because of the nature of the market and where we obtain our supplies, that costs are running away from us, and only the privileged few are living comfortably when the vast majority of our people will be struggling to get basics. When we compare production prices and volumes and availability of what across the border in Roraima, it makes your eyes open. Fresh vegetables and fruits are available in large quantities, to the extent where we are now talking about bringing significant portions of those fresh items to areas like Trinidad for processing and manufacturing and supply, to not only to Caricom, but to extra Caricom suppliers. To do that, the route has to improve. So as I speak to you now, the connection between northern Brazil and Guyana, a connection is being made there by road for road transport. And of course, we are discussing the possibility of sea transport out of Berbice into Trinidad and Tobago to bring significant amounts of the raw produce that would be produced in the Rupununi as well as in Roraima, and bring them into the Caricom region, and there be our supply of raw materials as against looking up north and across Europe and in Australia, and therefore produce more at home, become less dependent on supplies from halfway around the world. And that is the plan that we are working now. With respect to energy, we are all around the world, again, because of the current circumstances, experiencing significant increases in the price of energy. The thing about energy supply price, it tends to go up and down overnight, because it's one of those arrangements accepted by the world where price fixing is how the industry is run. You have these benchmarks where the price is determined by futures and what looks like available down the road, and you buy now for what might exist 2 or 3 months down the road, or even a week down the road, and the price goes up and down. But currently, what we are experiencing are situations that are likely to prevail, in that, given the demand for less, and in some cases zero use of hydrocarbons, meaning oil and gas, we in Caricom invited the head of the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is in fact a main spokesperson for the fight against climate change. I need not tell you the world's exposure to climate change and what that means for economy and social systems. But we did take the opportunity to host President Secretary General Guterres, to be able to say to him directly where we are in Caricom on this matter. Because while we acknowledge our own vulnerability to the deleterious effects of climate change, coastal erosion, stronger hurricanes, and all that sort of thing, diseases, pests, and of course the warming oceans and the seaweed and all of those things that people ascribe to, we acknowledge that these are difficulties, and we are in fact paying the price for other people's pollution of the atmosphere. We have been arguing that to the extent that there's funding available for countries to be able to cope with this new challenge, that we as small countries have been disadvantaged and nobody's taking us seriously, even though we are the ones bearing the brunt of it. We made these arguments to the Bretton Woods institutions that you can't expect us with small economies, the islands like St. Vincent, Grenada, St. Lucia, that after a hurricane, which devastates a significant proportion of the GDP, then the next morning you have to respond to the financial institutions on the same basis as Belgium or Germany or Spain or the United States. So if we all are fighting this problem, and especially those of us who are bearing the brunt because of what other people did or are doing, then we are asking for special considerations with respect to accessing funding to treat with our circumstance in the event that we come to grief from time to time, or even as we prepare to go into areas of renewable resources, renewable energy, and so on. So these are the conversations we've been having. And of course, most importantly, we do not want to, or we are not going to subscribe to the enthusiasm and the zeal that since we have decided that the demon or the ogre is hydrocarbon, that countries like Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana and Suriname, which are heavily dependent now on hydrocarbons, like Trinidad and Tobago, and like Guyana, who has just discovered that they have resources that they want to use to develop their country, and like Suriname, who have just discovered significant gas reserves, We are saying that we are to be allowed to produce these items into the international market as long as there's a market there, and at the same time do whatever we can in this transitional period, whether it is 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. But during that period, we are not to be excluded on some policy that it's a bad business and therefore we should stay out of it. Because other people who are far better off than we are deeply involved in it, and we know that they will stay in it as long as it suits their national purpose. And therefore, we will remain in it because it suits our national purpose. And we said that to the Secretary General. We think he understands that our situation is a little different, and we are seeing a transitional period. And during that transitional period, which will be, for us, we think it's going to be fairly long, and we will trade our products. And of course, insofar as we are trading gas, LNG, we are in fact helping the situation, because we are taking the position that gas is the clean fuel, and insofar as more people are using LNG, coming off coal, coming off oil, then those of us who are supplying gas, we are helping in the fight against climate change and its deleterious effects. So those are some of the things, but you will see a bit, you can get into a bit more detail if you go to the website of the Caricom. And now, having spoken about producing food, more food around the region, especially in certain areas in the region, the immediate problem that comes to face us as the logistical impossibility of getting that done is the whole question about transport. So transportation loomed large in our discussion and decision making. And before this meeting, the one in Guyana, when all that I just mentioned was our discourse and decision making, at that meeting, Caricom directed me as head of Trinidad and Tobago to work with the CDB towards determining the feasibility of reintroduction of marine transportation, because we have to have significant marine transportation. And we are discussing that along the models of the federal boats that had used, at the time we had the federal maple and the federal palm that went between the islands every day, carrying people and goods. It was the best time for those of us who moved around affordably in the region. And if we are going to produce significant amounts of raw material in the areas of Suriname and Brazil and Guyana, then to move them into Trinidad and Tobago and to the other islands where they'll be utilized, and to get them processed here, we would need proper transport. And therefore, the CDB and the team from Trinidad and Tobago, we have done some work which we presented, and we've got some clearances from this to carry on. And at the same time, Prime Minister of Barbados, who is responsible for finance and financial matters in CARICOM, she was authorized to look for the funding to fund those vessels as we are concluding that we have to have them. She's done some significant work on that, and to date we are in very productive talks with potential funders from the Middle East, the Emirates, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar, and places like that. They are interested in helping us and in taking some of the responsibility of getting us to have these infrastructure in place. We did have as a guest at the CARICOM meeting a senior minister from Saudi Arabia who presented his country's position with respect to the role that they could play in matters of energy and finance in the region. This is the first time we've had that kind of contact, and it has been very comforting to know that we do have these people who are able, for whom the immediate financing of these matters is not a problem, and also, like in the case of the Emirate countries, who are very well experienced in dealing with ferries and marine transport among their territories, to want to work alongside us. So Prime Minister Motley is working on that while I'm working with the CDB on the specifications and feasibility of ferry service and cargo marine service. And these are all given high priority. But initially, the focus for that marine transportation of goods, particularly large volume agricultural goods, is between Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Guyana, and Suriname. We're looking at this zone, but we can have another zone up north between the Leeward Islands. And then, of course, the issue of air transport came up. And you know, in Trinidad and Tobago, that's a very tricky one for us, in that we probably have, there are a number of airlines in the region, but we have the one that is going back to BWI days and then CAL, which we have now. I should tell you our position in all of these matters with air service is that Trinidad and Tobago is not interested in, as a government, to get involved in owning regional transport of the type that we had in Biwi, where we had significant responsibilities but carried it as a Trinidad and Tobago financial burden. We have committed, only last night I was looking at our commitment to keep CAL alive and well. The government of Trinidad and Tobago is already in hock, debt-wise, supporting CAL to the tune of over $250 million US, something like that, right? And of course, CAL's existence in the marketplace as an airline and flying routes are under the instructions of the government of Trinidad and Tobago to only fly routes that are commercially viable, and if additional routes are available outside of CAL's own decision, the territories that want those routes will have to contribute towards their sustenance. As you know, we in Tobago, we pay Virgin, we're paying them, probably American Airlines, literally pay them for seats not taken, so as to preserve the route into the territory. Now, if the seats are, if the route becomes attractive and it is filled out, then there's no cost. But to get the route started and supported for some significant time until it becomes viable and be known, the standard practice now is that the country that is asking for that literally have to put up a letter of credit up front. And if the seats are not taken, then that letter of credit pays for the empty seats. But if you manage to market the route and the seats are taken, well, then you don't, excuse me, you don't have to pay. These are some discussions that have to take place among the territories, but CAL would be there, but not taking a burden in the way that we have been accustomed to, because even as they are operating now on the limited schedule that we are using on the more profitable routes, CAL is still relying on the Minister of Finance of Trinidad and Tobago for significant support, and COVID did not help that. I mean, we have supported CAL considerably to be able to have an airline operating, maintaining all the benefits of having the airline by putting the resources of the people of Trinidad and Tobago virtually alone in this matter. But the region is looking for help, and maybe some kind of arrangement of, hub and spoke arrangements can be brought into bear, but we leave that for those who are involved in it. But the policy as to what role we would play is pretty clear. And if I may just mention on energy again, the Caricom heads have made two clear declarations, requests, taking positions with respect to the Petrocarib, where the government of Venezuela at an earlier time had put something in place called Petrocarib, where Caricom territories, not Trinidad and Tobago, because we didn't access it, we didn't need to, but most Caricom territories, all the small ones for that matter, were able to obtain oil from Venezuela at a reduced price on financial terms that they could have afforded, and that had proved to be a great benefit to them. And because of the United States sanctions against PDVSA, the Venezuelan oil company, our territories, our small territories here, have not been able to enjoy the benefit of the Petrocarib arrangement. The OECS, which as you know is a subunit within Caricom, they have gone to Venezuela and they have got the commitment of the Venezuelan government to restart Petrocarib. But that can only happen if the United States sanctions are given some reduction in its effect and a waiver is granted or the sanctions are removed. So CARICOM has called on the United States to remove the restrictions so as to allow our small territories who have been benefiting from Petrocarib to access the oil that Venezuela is making available on the financial terms that they have benefited from. CARICOM has also observed Trinidad and Tobago's position where we can do a whole lot better for ourselves, the region, and I dare say the world, by maximizing our infrastructure in producing more LNG, more fertilizers, if we are able to access more gas. We are not now accessing more gas because of United States sanctions against Venezuela. We have everything in place. We have a term sheet in place. We have a price arrangement in place, but we can't access the gas across the border. We, so far, have got agreement, and we are working on accessing our portion of the Loran Manatee field, but our position is only 27% of that. The Loran aspect of it would make a great benefit if Venezuela is so inclined to allow us to access it. And of course, we did negotiate with Venezuela to access significant gas reserves 17 kilometers from our hibiscus platform, and that gas reserve is in the Dragon Field. CARICOM has joined Trinidad and Tobago to make the request that we not be so stymied by this unilateral existence of a system of sanctions placed on Venezuela. You would have seen the United States itself is reviewing its position with respect to Venezuela. I can tell you that for the last 2 months, we in Trinidad and Tobago, we have been working very hard with the United States. We have in fact made an official request for a carve-out, for a waiver, so that we can proceed with our business as a nation, treating with our resources on or across our border. And we are anticipating that, given what we are facing now, that the same way CARICOM has been pushed towards getting on with the business of our CSME, that the United States would see the benefits of allowing Trinidad and Tobago to do its border and cross-border trade in energy, because the whole question of fertilizer is now as important as the fuel that goes into the tanks of vehicles, because a lot of food growing areas are now threatening to either not sow seeds or to increase their prices considerably because the price of fertilizers have gone up so significantly, largely because of the removal from the market. The two protagonists in the Russia-Ukraine war are people who are engaged in this business of fertilizer production, wheat production, and of course, since they are busy killing themselves, the food supply to the rest of the world is significantly curtailed. And it is our view that CARICOM has a role to play and could play a role if only we are allowed to do so. So you would see the specific wording of that in the communique of CARICOM. So I'll leave you there to go look at, see what we dealt with. One other thing I want to mention, that CARICOM has taken on board, because I did tell you that just before COVID struck, we were at the level of CARICOM, mainly Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, we were just putting in place a regional meeting to allow our technical people to address this issue of violence as a public health issue. But COVID came, and what we were able to do had to be stopped. The matter has been raised again at Caricom, and it has found tremendous support, and the heads of government have agreed that the Secretariat should work very quickly with the governments that are advancing this situation to see whether we can focus a bit more effectively on the issue of excessive violent crime in our societies, where crime is now a public health issue. As a matter of fact, the Prime Minister of Jamaica was one of the few who did not attend this meeting in person last week, because he was on his way, I guess, packing his bags, when one particular instance of crime in Jamaica had caused the Prime Minister to not turn up at the heads of government meeting. It was the decimation of a family, from baby to, I think, grandparents, from babe in arms to grandparents. 5 people murdered in cold blood had so traumatized the community and the country that the Prime Minister, head of Jamaica, could not have been at this meeting. He had to stay home to treat with that as the latest outrage in his society. And everybody is of the view that we need to focus on this public health issue where so many lives are lost, and we have to address it differently. We in Trinidad and Tobago have some views, and we expect that. I think I'm talking to the Prime Minister of Barbados along with Caricom. There's going to be this meeting where out of it we hope to come some approaches which would have the input from the technical people and the guidance of the governments for some new approaches to dealing with violence in our society. It is not only a Trinidad problem, it's a Caricom problem, it's a hemispheric problem, and it might even be a worldwide problem in most countries. But we are trying to see what we can do to change the mindset of people who believe that it is all right to engage in heinous, violent crimes. And while I am on that subject, I just want to let you know that you may not have been hearing me running a commentary on every single outrage in this country, because to do that would take up a lot of my time and effort at the expense of other things that we are struggling with. While I was away also, I saw the lawlessness that took place here one day, which must have had significant damaging effects on our economy and certainly damage our comfort and security, where people just sat about all over the country, capital city, to set fires, generate as much black smoke as you could. And some people believe that this is how they talk to the government. Some people believe that this is what's going to get them into political office. I simply say that as difficult as our circumstances are, it is not impossible. We have been through far greater difficulties than this, and we have come through, even with flying colors. So for those who tell you that this difficult period warrants further destruction, voluntarily imposed upon us by our own citizens, they are not acting in the best interests of the rest of us who would want to come out of these situations as quickly as possible. And as for the criminal element that is available to carry that out, on call, on cue, it will not prevent the government from doing what is in the best interest of the wider population. There are instances when things would have happened that we regret that they did happen, and that we take steps and then would be able to anticipate that they would not happen. But in the event that we have to deal with these things, heaping more coals on our head, denying us a drink of water, or making it difficult for us to move lawfully from one place to another, in no way improves our circumstance. What we are required to do now as a people is to do what is sensible, what is useful, what is helpful to reduce the amount of weight and pressure that's on our shoulders. Every country in the world today is under some kind of pressure, much of it unanticipated at this time. Doesn't mean that it would be like this all the time, but for this time, that is what is happening, and we are required to put our best foot forward. So those kinds of disturbances, we're better than that. Not getting everything we need, it may not be available, but insofar as it is available, it may be turn by turn. Let us have good sense prevail. The other issue I want to mention before I come to you, members of the media, is this matter of the failure of the bail bill in the Parliament yesterday. Was it yesterday? Some people would see that as something to crow about, because it was the government that took it to the Parliament, and it was the government that would have failed. I just want to point out to the population, yes, it was your government that took it to the Parliament, but standing in your shoes. It was the people, through their government, representatives in majority, who went to the Parliament and said that there are some of our citizens who are literally taking decisions to have a life of crime, and such persons from time to time are apprehended by the state agencies. And of course, going back to 1994, how long ago that would have been? 1994 to now? 28 years? 28 years ago, the situation was like that. 22 and 16. 30 years, 34. 38 years. In 1994, the situation was that bail that was available on call, and the Bail Act was there, that if you are charged, you can get bail except for specific offenses. From day one, certain specific offenses were accompanied by a denial of bail. So yesterday when I heard members of Parliament speaking eloquently and impressively that to deny someone bail strikes at the root of our jurisprudence, and how heinous that is. And of course, we should not contemplate denying people bail. I just want to let the population know that from day one, depending on the nature of the crime and the situation in the country, the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago has taken steps to reduce the access to bail. murder, treason, and never getting bail for that. Never, in my time. I have heard it said yesterday that bail is the prerogative of the judiciary, and Parliament must not interfere. And the government going to Parliament to seek to reduce the access to bail for certain categories of people is the heinous act, striking at the heart of our jurisprudence. That sounds good. Coming from what quarter? Now, the logic would be that if the society, through its people's representatives in the majority, have found it necessary, because of what is happening in the country, to go to the Parliament to restrict bail, it is because it is thought to be deemed to be a response to the situation that exists now. I could tell you, I have been in the Parliament for a long time. And on 12 occasions, this argument that was presented yesterday would not have been presented in the Parliament. Because on 12 occasions, the Bail Act was amended. You know why? Because at the various times between 2005 and 2015, various groups of parliamentarians would have seen the situation in the country and wanted to protect the population from that small minority who engage in criminal conduct, sometimes with impunity. So in 2005, Act number 19 of 2005, Act number 32, 2005, Act number 30, 2006, Act number 10, 2007, Act number 15, 2007, Act number 25, 2007, Act number 17, 2008, Act number 9, 2011, Act number 11 of 2011, Act number 12 of 2012, Act number 1 of 2014, Act number 7 of 2015. Every one of these acts on the part of parliamentarians during that period on all those dates that I just mentioned were amendments to the bail situation in this country, where the people, through their parliament, were seeking to restrain persons who would have been accessing bail, would have been benefiting from bail, but most importantly, even as they got bail and retained their freedom, they come out in the society and continue along their merry way. So to tell us today that to leave bail to the courts and the Parliament must stay away from it because either one, it brings no assistance, or two, it is the prerogative only of the judiciary, that is what yesterday's vote meant. That the population is now satisfied by a majority vote in the Parliament that we need not do anything about bail, and that bail would remain freely accessible to persons who would have claimed it as they needed it, as they are apprehended by the police. And that is in the face of common knowledge that there's a small group of people in this country, not the whole country, a small group of people who, many of them arm themselves, frighten, threaten, and hurt people as their livelihood in some instances. And of course, the numbers were given to the Parliament yesterday. It wasn't even 200. It was 100 and something people. I think 120 or something like that, persons who had been denied bail on the grounds that 116 people were denied bail as the law had made provision for, on the grounds that they had been seen by law enforcement as frequent offenders. And of course, it is not that they're denied bail ad infinitum. There's a restricted period. And of course, it has been shown that that was having an effect. Because I heard it said there were 75 people who were on 5 or more criminal charges, serious charges, but who still, bail was still easily available. But why would you want to interfere with bail for people like that? If they have to come out and work, put on a work to get the money, to pay the lawyer, to go to the court, to delay the case. Why? We're not fooling anybody in this country. Eh? You might think that you've done the government something, but the government went there on behalf of the population, the vast majority of the population, who we believe are saying that persons who have that kind of known record should not be able. The same way in the very beginning when somebody says, if you kill somebody, you should not get bail. Your case not tried yet, you haven't been convicted yet, but you're kept incarcerated. That decision was made by our forefathers long, long time ago. And then every one of these amendments that I mentioned, all 12 of them, they had certain restrictions as to certain conditions that will apply for that amendment to apply. So it wasn't a question of denying bail as a feature of our constitutional right. It was setting certain conditions to meet the circumstances that we are living with. I didn't hear that in the past. I didn't hear that. What I heard is that to deny bail is in fact striking at the root of the separation of powers, because bail is the prerogative of the judiciary. Without casting any aspersion on our judiciary, because I want to tell you, I still maintain great confidence in our judiciary. But suffice it to say that I am still very unhappy at the rate at which justice is dispensed in Trinidad and Tobago, and the ease with which people who are harming our society are walking in and out of the courts in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is coming to a stage where the vast majority are now afraid of the small minority. That's what it is. The vast majority of us are being made to be afraid of a small minority. I would hope that eventually, if what was said is true, that the judiciary would step in and bail and its availability to persons who have demonstrated the intention to live a life of violent crime, that such persons would be restrained from doing it with impunity. I want to also mention that as a matter of national security, I have asked the Attorney General to consider whether we should not, from here on in, and for some restricted period of time, prevent the marketing of used metals in Trinidad and Tobago. Because it appears as though there are persons in our society, and I hope it is not that they have a right to do so. There are persons in our society who are now taking the position that they do not care who they harm, but they make a living by destroying our infrastructure to be able to market the materials from which the infrastructure is made. And pick it up in our country, manhole cover, doesn't matter if you fall in the hole and break your neck or kill your child or kill your wife. Manhole cover, they're selling that. Cable, they cut the cable. Now they're cutting the water lines. And it doesn't matter how many hundreds or thousands of persons are inconvenienced or hurt. But that market is now thriving. I have asked the Attorney General to look at it, to see what is available to the government, so that we can try and protect the population from this kind of behavior. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are difficult times. In many ways, confluence of difficulty. But as I would say, as I know, we have been through more difficult periods, and we've come out of it by doing the right things for the right reasons. If you have any questions, I will take them now. Yes, just identify yourself. And
good afternoon, Prime Minister. Charlene Rampersad from Guardian Media. You spoke about the protest that we saw happening on Monday. Do you have any comments on the police-involved shooting of these 3 young men on Saturday morning, which would have led to these protests?
Well, as I said, that there are things that happen that we expect not to happen, that we hope will not happen, and that circumstances don't develop when these things happen. And I do not, there's an investigation taking place, and I would not want to comment too widely on it, but I would have rather if that did not happen. So, and we await the investigation, and those investigations will tell us the extent to which it was an action that was avoidable, reasonable, illegal, or legal. So we await that. That is how a civilized society treats with these things. I know that emotions are high. The loss of life, the loss of friends, the loss of family, loss of community members, it brings pain. And people feel that pain. But we need to not create more pain for the wider society. Let us handle it in a civilized way, get to the bottom of it. We have instruments in place for dealing with that, and we will deal with it because we don't encourage wrongdoing where wrongdoing appears to have taken place.
You also spoke extensively on food security and food insecurity. We saw just 2 weeks ago, to the date exactly, the Trade and Industry Minister would have mentioned that the government is considering different proposals to assist vulnerable families to cope with the increase in the flour price. Can you tell us, give us any sort of update on where that process has reached?
No, I couldn't. I don't have any new information except to tell you that the government provides its assistance in a variety of ways. A lot of people in this country, probably the most silent people in this country, get government support in a variety of ways. And also, NFM, as you know, is a company that buys, NFM doesn't buy flour. NFM and other companies buy wheat. And you would have seen since last year how wheat prices have been going up considerably. NFM is owned partly by the state and is also on the stock exchange owned by citizens who bought shares in NFM. Last year, in order to ease the burden on the flour using population, NFM absorbed a significant amount of the increase that came with the purchase of wheat. That went on and it showed up in NFM books at the expense of its shareholders, the government and others, as significant loss. This year, that continued, and the price of wheat went even higher. NFM, as a business, had little choice but to pass some portion of that increase to the user. And therefore, I don't know that the government can intervene to ask NFM to do what it did last year, which is absorb the cost and subsidize the product. If there's any way that the government can help, as the minister said, we would look at it to see. But as you would have seen in some other countries, people have taken the position to do a little bit of switching from the flour to something else, because the flour is definitely getting more and more expensive. So we'll want to encourage the use of other carbohydrates insofar as we are able to. I mean, I heard my colleague in Tobago very early in his tenure saying that Tobago would like to get involved with breadfruit flour and cassava flour. I don't know what progress they're making with that. But we are buying these high prices are imported prices. The price of wheat has gone up tremendously. And the trouble is, if the fertilizer situation doesn't change quickly, it is earmarked to go up even more because less people are going to put down seeds, and those who put seeds down are paying far more for it in fuel and fertilizer, and when they do produce a harvest, they are going to want an even higher price for it. So the outlook, unless there are significant changes in the input side, we can think we have to anticipate that those prices are going to go up, and government subsidy, is something that we have been carrying. Even when we carry it, it goes unacknowledged, and I don't know. I await the minister's proposals if there is any to come, because I don't know that we have too much wiggle room there. In the case of fuel, I've seen people marching up and down talking about the government taking away the fuel subsidy and so on. Completely erroneous. Talking to the Minister of Finance, talking to Paria, the government is still paying hundreds of millions of dollars to subsidize fuel at the current price. For fuel to remain at the price that it is now, still the cheapest in the region and among the cheapest in the world, the government, through its agencies, are paying significant subsidies. So it is good for the population to know that not everything you hear that is being said by persons who think that the country should be ungovernable, that those conversations are based on fact. They are based on a lot of fiction and expectation that all hell will break loose. I believe that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are sufficiently intelligent, sufficiently well connected to the rest of the world to understand exactly where we stand in these matters. And sometimes we have to make adjustments. And some of those adjustments are inconvenient. And we need to absorb that inconvenience so as to be able to have another day. The bail bill.
It was not supported by a sufficient number of independents. The majority of independent senators did not support it. And listening to the debate, I think the problem was that people felt that we are moving to a situation where the majority of people in remand yard are being sent there not by the courts, not at the behest of the court, but at the behest of the state, the government. One of the things that I think was pointed out was that it's for, before people even come to court for an offense, the position is no bail, go to remand yard. And the issue of filling up this place, which is not a pleasant place, with people who are just, maybe somebody made an error, maybe somebody was found in the wrong place at the wrong time, and being sent there for 120 or more days if the trial starts.
I don't know that I see where that argument is going from a point of view of sympathy. But I don't know that the people who the bail bill is isolating and identifying for reduction in bail is that person. The bail bill and the 120-day, and then, of course, a murder is a first offense. I see people, well, okay, we have evolved to the stage now where people are getting bail for murder. But let's put aside those few. If you kill your first person, you can't tell the court it's your first offense. If you are hijacking somebody, if you are kidnapping somebody, it is the nature of the situation. And remember, I told you, when we started to amend this bill in 1994, it was because the circumstances, the prevalence, the frequency, the threat, the danger, the insecurity had arisen where it was said that these small number of people, not the hundreds or thousands who are in remand yard, the people who are in remand yard up there, many of them are in remand yard having not been there because it was 116 persons. 116 persons. Now I tell you something. 116 persons don't sound like a lot. But if they are allowed to repeat what they have been doing, if they are allowed to repeat it, then one person can do a lot. So it is not a correct analysis to say that all these people, poor people, children in Romania, and they get there first. And so one needs to have a closer analysis of exactly who is there and what they are there for if we are going to use the population of the remand yard to say, well, you know what? Let us allow the habitual offenders, usually using a firearm, frequent more than once, twice, 3, 4 times, and those times are the times that the police know about it. In the what?
We don't have confidence in the judiciary to deal with it.
No, you shouldn't say that. I started off by saying that notwithstanding, I have confidence in the judiciary.
Therefore, he wants to treat the people.
Let me tell you why. I'm sure if you go and check the list, the government payroll and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, you would see that there was a judiciary there in 1994. There was one there in 2014. And when I heard the argument from an opposition member, it reminded me that one of the first acts of the government in 2010, in July 2010, one of the first things that UNC government did was to interfere with the bail bill, to deny bail to an individual. Since then, we have passed a number of laws to treat with a whole plethora of new offenses, human trafficking, anti-gang, and so on. This is because these have become the realities of our life today.
The situation has gotten worse, notwithstanding all these safeguards that the Parliament has sort of put in.
Well, all I would say is that it would have been even worse if we didn't have those safeguards. If you're drowning and you get up and you get one breath of air, you're far better off than if you never surfaced. It is all well and good to say the situation would have been worse. That is an assumption, because we didn't experience it worse. But if we don't do what we think could help, then we may experience the worst that could have been. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not here querying with anybody on the vote, I'm simply saying that because we have not used that, which may have given us some support and some relief, we have chosen to have bail available on call. So the people who benefit from easy and frequent bail, basically what we have done is to allow them, when they are known to us and apprehended by us, to come out and continue doing what they have been doing. And if we think as a people that is the best thing to do, then we just have to hope for the best.
Do you also think, how would you respond to the view that it was an exercise in futility to bring it before the Parliament? Because even if it had passed the Senate, it would not have passed the House.
Well, we don't know that, you see. And, well, the opposition has done worse. They have said things and done otherwise. But our job is to bring it there. Because if we didn't bring it there, and you as a reporter got up and said, but why this country doesn't have that? The opposition will say, the government didn't do their work, the government didn't bring it there, and they might even go as far as say, if the government had brought it there, we would have supported it. And we always travel in hope that they live here, that they see what is going on, that they know what is going on. I just told you, as soon as I came into office in 2010, after a campaign where crime was the #1 issue in 2010, the first thing they did was to say bail is too easily available. And I could tell you, I have voted many times between 2010 and now for that. from the opposition benches, I didn't take the position then that Raymond Yard full, or that is only certain people going in there, or that is a right that is entrenched and it should be left to the judges. I didn't do that. When I voted 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, when I did that, it was because I focused on the possibility that that vote would have put a mechanism in place that could give some relief to the police, to the very court, and to the citizens as a whole. That's how I look at it. But apparently it has changed considerably to the point now where we are now saying that we can't have so many people in the prison, or we can't have the parliament sending people to prison. Again, that is not a correct statement to say they go there by the government. The government can't send a soul to the prison. The government can't apprehend a soul as government, as parliament. It is a police officer who would have apprehended somebody, and the minute that happens, the law that the country would have passed through its parliamentary process kicks in, and there's no role there for the government. None. The government rules stop after you pass the law in the parliament and you put the resources there for the agencies to identify who did this crime and to whom. So when somebody getting up and saying, all the people up there, the government send them there, that tells me that they do not seriously want to engage the issue that is threatening life and limb in Trinidad and Tobago. We are, in fact, a very violent society, and some people have seen that now as something that they could use to prosper by. That is the unpleasant reality of it. And how does one treat with that as human beings? We need to restrain those who are so inclined. And how do you do that? Through laws, because we are a law-abiding society. We aim to be.
What about the alternatives? I listened to Jayanti, say something and something reasonable, which is that the Attorney General, the previous Attorney General, had said it costs $25,000 a month to maintain someone a prisoner in remand yard. And she pointed out that the cost of an electronic bracelet is $12,000. And therefore, it makes economic sense, instead of going the route of that, to give more people, buy more electronic bracelets and use that as a mechanism to deal with crime fighting, rather than just putting people there and feeding them at a much higher cost.
That is a specious argument, because the electronic bracelets are in fact being used under circumstances where that, by the system, the judiciary and otherwise, is deemed to be the appropriate action. Well, we never had any at one stage. We have some now. We're getting more. It's being utilized. But to say electronic bracelet as a substitute for bail, it may arise in certain cases here and there. But that is where the judiciary is making that distinction. But the bottom line is, that is a reason not to support the bail bill. Because if it was as simple as that, we just close down all the prisons and put a bracelet on everybody. Is that what it is?
Bracelets more effectively and using.
Well, as I'm saying, it is. But the fact of the matter is that the use of the bracelet is a part of the package of tools that we're using to respond to the criminal element. Right. Whether enough of it is being used or so is another story. But the bottom line is, it is not a substitute, right, for people who are on a number of charges for violent, antisocial action. Go in and come out of the revolving door and go on, right? Because I'll tell you something, once you choose crime or you get involved in crime, there is a push factor to get involved in more crime, because crime costs money when you fall into the hands of the law. But the first thing you need is to try and get your freedom. And that freedom is to be had at a cost. You're going to be represented by a lawyer, and it is not cheap. And many of the said people who you say end up in remand yard, those people are not people of means who have go to the bank account and take out a certain amount of money and pay the lawyer. But they have to pay the court. They have to pay the cost of getting back that freedom. Where do you think it's coming from? Where's it coming from? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 charges with these fees to pay to preserve that freedom. Where do you all think this money is coming from? And all the denial of bail is doing is trying to restrict that opportunity while the court system looks at the evidence and hopefully will dispense justice in time. Yes, Arlene.
We saw just about a week ago Mr. Enel resigned from the NGC. Can you tell us when we're going to get a new chairman appointed?
Yes, the cabinet will appoint a new chairman very soon. It's under consideration. As soon as we appoint someone, on the very day you will know.
Darren Dahou from the Newsday. So, in relation to the criminal justice system, you're aware there are many moving parts to have from arrest, conviction. Incarceration before trial is one part of it. And if you look at the statistics, we would see that someone charged with a serious offense or a repeat offender would have to spend a considerable period of time incarcerated before they get trial. Sometimes as much as 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Now, at the end of this cycle...
Are you raising that in the context of the 120-day bail?
I'm raising it in the context of the presumption of innocence and the issue of the Bail Act not getting any support in the Parliament.
That's not true. It got support. It got considerable support. It didn't get enough support.
Well, getting support to be enacted beyond August 4th. The reason in that context, do you think that the conviction rate in this country is not as it should be? And if someone spends 15 to 20 years in prison awaiting trial for an offense, a serious offense, albeit a serious shooting, chopping, robbery, and at the end of the day, when a jury determines on the guilt or innocence of an accused, usually it is a test on the evidence of either the police officers, the forensic evidence, or the witnesses in the case. And the conviction rate is very low. We have a very understaffed office of the DPP. There's 100 and something vacancies there. I mean, I know that is not your domain, that's the JLSC. But when you look at it holistically, it doesn't seem to be that incarcerating someone for a considerable period of time is an answer to reducing crime. Because at the end of the day, the person is still getting off and coming back. If they are like-minded, they commit more offenses, they come back, they commit even more serious offenses because they have been trained in prison. So what is the real answer to the crime? Is it having better detection of crime, having stronger prosecutions, having quicker trials? What do you think is the solution? Because we have gaps in the system.
Well, if I take where you started saying that the whole question of treating with crime in the justice system is a series of moving parts. If I take that as I have taken it, I think it is relatively easy to see that you can't take one part that is fashioned fit for purpose here and put it there. Now, much of what you have said there have nothing to do with the restriction of bail for 120 days. What you raised there is the whole question of the speed at which justice is dispensed overall. And I agree with everything you have said there about how slow it is and how low the detection level is and so on. But that is just one part of the many moving parts. So if one wants to argue the logical conclusion of what you just said, I was afraid that you were going to say that we shouldn't bother to arrest anybody. But I noticed you didn't go there because you were not saying that. But if one takes it to its logical conclusion about how slow it is and people are still going to commit crime even after so-and-so, then logically, well then, in which case I could say, well, don't bother to go after them and bring them in and lock them up. And I'm sure you're not saying that. So the very many moving parts in the system, it's like an aircraft engine. Every single part is required to be working well if the craft is going to stay in the air. And unfortunately, I don't think I'm telling tales out of school here. I said so publicly a few weeks ago, a few months ago. The rate at which justice is dispensed in this country, for whatever reason, is just unacceptably slow. As Prime Minister of this cabinet, I have gone over and above the consideration of what can the government do to facilitate an acceleration in the justice system. And I am not seeing it. In other words, we are making the investment and we're not seeing it. I don't know what is the reason, but I'm sure if we are able to improve our detection and also to dispense justice in a more, in a swifter fashion, that will have some effect on the situation. But to have to say that I'm not happy, I don't think there's anybody in the country who's saying that we're happy with the rate. I mean, for a person to be in detention, in remand for 15 years, that is just unacceptable. And the one question I would ask is, how did this happen? How? I don't know the details. I've read about it. I've heard about it. Question is, why is this happening?
So, Prime Minister, taking your answer as it is, the police, they have a very critical role in terms of bringing charges with credible evidence. And oftentimes you would see serious criminal cases are falling down because of police not being prepared to prove the case that they have brought before the court. And in the meantime, that person, as you just said, and you agreed with me, that they would have spent a considerable period of time incarcerated on a charge, an allegation. They are still presumed innocent, even though they may have multiple charges. It's the onus is on the state, and the state in this regard is the police, to bring credible evidence which will stand the test before the jury. And that is, we are not seeing that because it is a fact that the conviction rate is very, very low. It's not where it ought to be. And the only reason that could possibly be is because people are not believing what the police are saying. And that, to me, is a very, very serious concern.
Are you talking about the conviction rate or the detection rate? Because these are two different rates, eh? And the conviction rate will always be the system of detection of crime, identification of the perpetrator, and the establishment of guilt is a plus or minus system. We don't have a system like one or two countries that I can name where once you are arrested, you are guilty. You have just said it. It's a presumption of innocence. That means there will be times when that presumption is deemed not to be sufficiently strong because there are thresholds to which you have to rise to get that conviction. You might hear that A, B, C, D was done. We are not arguing with that. It has been done. But E, F was not done, and therefore you lose the case. So you have to go to this arbiter, which is the court, to determine if you will have that freedom or if you will be convicted. And I'm sure that we don't spend as much time analyzing the many instances where the conviction is had because the case is proven. I think we spend more time talking about, especially the high sensationalized ones, where a person get off, as we call it. But in many instances, if you ask me now, I'll be able to tell you, of all the cases that go to the court, do we have more being convicted or less? I don't have that figure. But I can tell you, the system presumes that you're innocent until you're proven guilty. That innocence can be established by a single witness fumbling a line in an answer. A policeman could work 25 hours for the day for 3 years, and at the moment a particular question is put to a witness, and the case turns on that. It doesn't mean that the case should not have been brought. And as I said before, the system is not one where once you are arrested and charged that you are guilty, and guilt must be found, and guilt has been proven. There are a couple of countries that have that system, I'm sure you don't want that here.
Do you agree that remand yard is a place where people come out of it more seasoned in their criminal behavior, activity, and
as it is operating now, I would say yes. It's a place that nobody should want to be, and the way it is operating now, remand means what? Mr. Hans, you know the meaning of remand?
Yes, pending your trial,
right?
Kept in custody.
It's a holding bay.
Pending trial.
It's a holding bay.
Yeah.
But two things happen there. One, the volume of people alleged to have committed crimes make the remand yard highly populated. Two, people who end up in remand and for whom bail is available, under even the best of terms, can't make the bail. We have done a number of things. For example, we changed the bail matter. Cash bail is available. We intervened to make cash available so that you can get bail. The court is to notice that and set bail where bail can be reached. Yeah? Then also we talked about allowing judge-only trials, so you don't have to work the long system. And we also talk about removing people who would have been there rotting for marijuana that they smoked. We made marijuana, the use of marijuana by an individual, a small quantity, not illegal and so on. So there are some things we've done to take that pressure off the remand.
Take people while they are stuck there so that they don't come out worse than they went in.
Well, as I said, there are a number of moving parts, and that is one of them. You know, rehabilitation is one, but, you know, you can only be rehabilitated in a system. If you're innocent, nobody can come to rehabilitate you. It is the ones that are convicted that, you know, and maybe sentenced that go now into some element of rehabilitation. And as you know, rehabilitation is a promise, it's not a guarantee. There's no guarantee that this effort to rehabilitate you will change your attitude. You know, there are these kinds of problems. But fortunately, I think it is a small number of people who are in that situation. And therefore, we ought to be able to make a better effort and a stronger effort to not let this small population of people be such an issue in the country.
Prime Minister, can you say what happened to the promise to eliminate preliminary inquiries?
That matter, we passed some of it in the Parliament. I think some of it is proclaimed. And we are working towards, it is in operation, there's some proclamation issue. And of course, the last I heard, there was some last minute requests for some tweaking. But the intention is, as we did say and do in the Parliament, that we would move the system to one where preliminary inquiries, which is that first trial, before a trial, does not form part of the system, because that was, in fact, deemed to be a major contributor in terms of how long a person, you know. But there are people who are opposing that to it, because there are people who believe that their best chance is to get to a preliminary inquiry and try and not get the matter heard so that the evidence doesn't come out. And therefore, if you can escape at a preliminary, and the preliminary inquiry becomes a whole trial by itself. Initially, a preliminary inquiry, as Sir Larry would say, in my early days, I knew a preliminary inquiry was just to establish whether, in fact, a prima facie case was made out against you, and that somebody wasn't just charging you and jailing you capriciously. Now the preliminary inquiry is a matter for the Privy Council, and every comma, whose shoelaces tie, who buttered the bread, and so on. All that is in a preliminary inquiry, because there are people, once they have the means, for whom the preliminary inquiry is their best attempt to escape justice. And people who have that problem, I don't know that we can say don't try to escape justice. The law provides the openings and they use it. And the government from time to time will come in and try to prevent the escape through hatches and loopholes. So it's an ongoing, evolving thing. Yes.
So, one of the things that I presume is before you, I understand that the president, office of the president would have written to you in relation to existing vacancy for the deputy director of the Police Complaints Authority. The act, as it is, there must be a director and a deputy director for that body to operate. The vacancy came about on June 28th, if I'm correct, and since then there have been 4 fatal police killings. 3 of them, including the teenagers who were shot dead on Independence Square, and another guy who was killed in Mova. I'm told that there are some mechanisms in place for the PCA to continue to operate, but not the way that it should be, to gather the intelligence, to gather the evidence, to ensure that there's no possibility of cover-up in those cases. Is that a matter that you are dealing with? And have you consulted the opposition leader on this matter so that that vacancy can be filled with expedition?
The Police Complaints Authority, to the best of my knowledge, continues to function. The Police Complaints Authority doesn't go out of office because the deputy is not there. But steps are taken to appoint a deputy upon the end of the term of that the person who was there. You correctly said that person's term came to an end, the contract came to an end on the 28th of June, which was 2 days before the end of the month. It requires the appointment is done by the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition agreeing, and if that agreement is not had, then the President can go ahead and do it in her own right. I can tell you that the system is working. I have received the request. I have put it to the opposition leader. Only, I think that correspondence started moving on the 1st of July. And it is moving. It is now with the opposition leader to determine whether she agrees with what is put before her. Based on my agreement or disagreement and hers, and it will put the president in a position very soon to make an appointment, either based on what we have agreed to do, these 2 offices, Prime Minister and Opposition Leader, or if we can't agree, the President will proceed to appoint somebody. That is the law. And so therefore, it is not really accurate to say that because the deputy is not there, they can't proceed to look at these matters that you have mentioned. However, the role of the deputy is important, otherwise there wouldn't have been a deputy there. But the absence of the deputy for a few days doesn't mean that the entity is not functioning.
I want to go back to something you spoke on earlier. You spoke about the issue of food availability and food security. You being a farmer, I'm sure that you would go to your garden and reap what you eat. How has you changed your diet to move away from foreign inputs? And what advice would you give to the average person in Trinidad to be able to change their diets, to move away from the foreign inputs? Yes, there are certain things that we are accustomed to, like cereals and so forth, but there are certain things that I'm sure that we can grow here. And on the flip side of that, we spoke about the Caricom countries, including the state in Brazil being a 14th state for Caricom. Are we going to say who plants what so that there will not be a glut?
Well, all of those things, let me answer the first part first. My personal diet is like everybody else. It's personal. You decide what taste you like and what you eat more than others. And of course, some of us make an effort to eat what is deemed to be the healthy food and not just the tasty one. So I haven't had personally to make any adjustment in my own diet, because the things that I like, which is what really drives the diet, is what you like, you eat, are still available. Some of it I produce myself, some of it I acquire. And a lot of it, our country produces a fair amount of healthy food, fresh vegetables in particular, but that does not form a sufficient part of the diet of the local population. And that is an area where circumstances sometimes push you to that. Because once you can get what you like, you do not set about to change it. In areas where there's real difficulty, you eat what keeps you alive. And we're not there yet. So I would think that if we are to strengthen our position, a diet change, even a small shift, would be useful and may be forced upon us. I mean, the external prices of some of the staples that we have been accustomed to, that price pressure might cause some people to think maybe I could use something else that is cheaper, which incidentally may turn out to be healthier. So these are things that we encourage. The school feeding program, we expect that when it restarts in September and going forward, that we are going to be looking very closely at what is fed to the children. Because one, from a health standpoint, and the other from an affordability standpoint. And finally, there are some inputs in food preservation that are unhealthy. One is sugar, the other is salt, and the third one is fat. Those three things are major inputs into our diet. And because we have paid no attention to that, our country has a huge problem with respect to non-communicable diseases, which means lifestyle diseases. And I think our national conversation, our health, our sport, our conversations need to focus a bit on that. There is some of it going on, but not enough.
Prime Minister, you spoke about a ban, an export ban, a possible export ban on used metals. Any sort of timeline for that?
I'm awaiting the guidance of the Attorney General to tell me what we can do and how we can do it before I can answer that question. But certainly, we are not producing those metals in this country. We import them for a particular purpose. And when they are put to use, other people are coming to take them out to sell them. And in so doing, disrupting our lives in a very significant way. So the first thought is that we not trade in them to deny the incentive for the thieves to take them out. And then we take it from there.
Hearing sometime about an audit of firearms in TTPS. What has happened to that? And will the report be made available to stakeholders such as the Parliament and the Police Service Commission, both of which have to adjudicate on persons applying to the senior positions in the TTPS?
Well, I wouldn't say that it has to do with persons applying. I don't want to go there at all. But certainly, the report, my understanding is that there's a very professional team that is doing a fairly in-depth examination of the data within the police service, and that report should be available sometime in the very near future. Given the nature of the terms of reference, I see no reason why that report would not be available for public consumption. And certainly, whatever is found there, I think because of the role that the Commission plays in the management, we've had public conversations, allegations from investigators about the management of that particular department. So I am anticipating that. I don't know what the report will contain, but I know what the terms of reference are. And if the terms of reference are stuck to, they should present us with a body of data that should be of interest to a wide cross-section of the population. Last question.
Professor, my last question, I would have asked you a question on just before you traveled to Suriname, and you got a bit cross with me. But I will ask you the question again.
If I wasn't cross enough.
Prior to your appointment.
If what you're saying is true, that you asked me a question, I was cross with you, but you're going to ask me again. It's either you think I'm mad, or you want me to get cross with you again, and I don't think so.
No, sir, I'm asking the question in the public's interest.
The public? Come on.
So prior to your appointment of Attorney General Reginald Armour, you must have had a conversation with him as to what cases he may have been involved in what cases he ought to recuse himself in. You must be aware that this matter in Miami is the largest civil forfeiture claim the state has brought against those charged in the Caricom matter. Mr. Armour is saying that he forgot how deeply involved he was in the matter on an affidavit. It has been in the public domain that Mr. Armour would have gone to court on numerous times. He would have made serious legal arguments. He would have been paid substantial fees. He was a senior counsel at the time. He is saying now that he can't recall those things. What I'm asking is, when you had that initial conversation to ask Mr. Armour, please join my cabinet, sir, did he say, well, okay, I have these matters, but I wouldn't be able to deal with it? Or did you ask him, can you give me full disclosure, so when I am making my determination for you to be the second most senior member of my cabinet, I will know where you stand?
Mr. Bahal, all of that description is good, and I would love to see you at the cabinet table or somewhere else making it. Mr. Armour is not a pick-up side person who was brought into the cabinet as Attorney General. Mr. Armour is a person of high distinction who functioned in this country as a judge on the bench. And certainly, when he was offered the position, the question of him not continuing his business as a practitioner would have been understood and agreed to. But to ask me if I ask him about all the cases and identify this case and that case and this case and that case, all of that would have been covered by the understanding that as Attorney General, you cannot function as a practitioner practicing for anybody. But as Attorney General, coming to represent the public and advising the cabinet, there certainly would be no limit to the advice that he can give the cabinet. And of course, if there's a conflict while he's doing that, he knows what to do, and he has done that. And I will say no more. I told you early on, I will say no more on this matter. Maybe one of these days when you and I are having a beer, we'll discuss it further. But right now, where it's at, that kind of interpretation that you are putting on it is not going to serve the purpose. And I'm glad to see that you have identified and that the whole idea of this matter of fraud against the state is so important that it is now attracting the attention of the media. I say no more. I let the court do its work. And with respect to who I select to put in the cabinet, I take full responsibility for that. And with respect to the motive as to why anybody will do what you are implying that is done, the case has not been made. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you all again sometime soon. We have one more question.
This is how you play New Instant Millionaire. To play, simply scratch the dot.
In that scenario, given that it came out.
Yeah. I saw the guy, it's the Express, right? I saw the Express this morning. Of all the pictures the Express could use this morning, he used me and Boris Johnson. Where is that? Boris Johnson had 1 million pictures in the Express. The one day he loses his office, you put me on the front page. No, I am a little saddened by it. Mr. Johnson came in with a tremendous support, but it only goes to show, that when you are in these positions, how precarious your tenure can be. But the British system is very strong. The British people are very wily in dealing with politicians and politics, and we are into a very interesting period now. I don't think there's much more that one can say on that. I think he's done what he thinks is the best for the country, and it's for us to enjoy the news going forward. We learn from everything every day. Life is a continuous education for all of us. Thank you very much.
This is how you play New Instant Millionaire. To play, simply scratch the dollar signs and shield symbols in the main area to reveal your winning numbers and potential prizes. Match any of your numbers to any of the winning numbers to win the prize shown below. Reveal a money dollar sign symbol and win double the prize shown. Reveal a money stack and win $1,000, or find a stack of coin symbol and win $500. This is your chance to turn $100 into $1